Seattle Times has a piece out today about the $15 billion shortfall in the budget for Washington State. And as a result, you're starting to see what they describe as the largest wave of layoffs since the Great Recession. That's what they say. And we knew that this was going to happen. We knew that there were going to be layoffs. We just didn't know what it would look like. And really, we didn't know how it would unfold. There was obviously some focus on not filling empty positions, and that's a way to save funds. And obviously they did that. But you're going to start to see these cuts to about 1,000 positions overall. They say at the beginning of the first legislative session as governor, Bob Ferguson directed most executive branch agencies to cut 6% of their budget. Now, the one that we've seen so far have the most cuts, Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, the agency that is one of the worst at what it is they do, and sometimes they argue it's because of lack of staff, saw significant cuts. Now, or will see, I should say. 731 positions they've got to cut statewide. Now, 430 of them are just unfilled vacancies. But that's still a lot that they're going to have to get to. The 300 or so. There will be layoffs. They say more than 1/3 of the 300 layoffs are in management positions across all divisions. About 60% of the positions are funded by state dollars and another 40-ish% or so coming from federal funds. Cuts to the federal supplemental nutritional assistance program, SNAP, or Medicaid benefits could change the situation with some federally funded positions. Department of Corrections say that they will see some quote-unquote extraordinary effects because of state budget cuts. But so far, they haven't seen anything or really minimal changes because of federal dollars. They say they were able to avoid the 6% across-the-board cuts, unlike other agencies, as part of Ferguson's quote-unquote emphasis on public safety. So what does this all mean? I have a question, including in the Seattle Times story, because I went through it. I did something I don't normally do on Seattle Times stories. This one's a rather lengthy one, but regardless of length, I never finish a Seattle Times story because there's never any reason to. You don't really get anything the further in. You just read words, but they don't really tell you anything. But I did notice something in this case because I read the whole thing. Remember when the DOGE cuts were being proposed and the Trump administration at first said they were going to make a lot of cuts and then they ended up cutting a whole bunch of people? Remember that whole storyline?
Yep.
What was the media coverage? Can you remind me?
It was apocalyptic.
End of world.
Yeah.
You might not. Did you hear they laid off the man who had a key to a locked door and now no one can get into that building? They had no, I guess no locksmiths were around and they couldn't get the key back, I guess, from the one dude who had the key.
Society was going to come to a halt. People will die.
They didn't know what was going to happen. And beyond that, what kind of coverage, what was the actual content of the coverage? Here's John, who graduated from Gonzaga University with an interest in giving back to the community. He moved with his wife and his bulldog Pinky to Idaho, where they were guaranteed housing so that they could work at this facility. And they lost their job, and they're homeless now.
Pinky? That's a bad name for a bulldog.
I didn't name the dog, except, I guess I did just make it up. Pinky, it doesn't matter. You know what happened to Pinky? He starved to death because the family couldn't feed this poor dog because they lost their job because of evil Elon Musk and Doge. Did we get nonstop coverage like that? Nonstop, nationally and locally. Where's that coverage here? What about the 300 Department of Health and Human Services staff members who are losing their jobs? Where's the concerns and over-the-top concerns about how we might not have health or human services anymore? Nothing. It's gone. Where's that coverage? Where's King 5 sending the Facing Race team to see which minority group was disproportionately impacted by the layoffs? Where's that kind of coverage? Why is it that they don't seem to be all that interested here? At least in framing and leading the coverage in that way. In this case, they're just framing and leading the coverage of this is what's going to happen. It's going to be bad, we think, possibly, but here's just the who, what, when, where, why, and how. It's weird how they did that here. It's weird how we just learned that the Washington Talking Book Center, this is the Braille Library, the only one in the entire state, had to cut a bunch of programs because of cuts from the Democrats. Where's the coverage about the poor people whose livelihoods will be cut because they're no longer working on the program? Where's the coverage of the blind person who no longer has access, or the visually impaired person who doesn't have access to the Braille program? Where's that coverage? It's weird how there's just no breathless coverage about that. Why do you think that might be? Because Democrats are responsible for it?
Yeah, that's why.
Is it possible that they don't even think it's that big of a deal, and maybe they even agree we need to cut down some of the bloat when it's a message coming from Democrats?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Huh. I'm shocked, I tell you. I'm shocked.